I've got some more high-end dupes coming your way, so let's get started. This week I'm taking inspiration from Lulu in Georgia. I love the look of these marble risers, but at $699, I think I'll pass and make them myself for a whole lot less. You're going to need some toilet paper rolls or any other cylindrical object that you have, a wood circle, this one's from the Dollar Tree Plus section, and then some marble contact paper, and that's it. This project is super easy. Of course, you want to remove the sticker from that wood round. I always recommend to remove stickers from your projects to make them look a little bit more high-end. Then I'm going to take my toilet paper roll and measure how wide I need to cut that contact paper down. All 3 rolls fit within the length, so I just need to cut that down as well. I left a little overhang on the contact paper so that I can tuck it inside. And you can find tons of contact paper options online to match your personal style and your home decor. Your cost for this project will vary slightly depending on what you choose. Next, I'm going to wrap each toilet paper roll with the contact paper. I was a little bit surprised that the contact paper didn't stick to the cardboard as well as I thought that it would, but since I overlap it a little bit at the end and tucked in the ends, it worked out just fine. I cut a few slits all the way around and then I folded that paper inside. That way you have a nice clean looking edge. And I repeated this to cover all 3 of the toilet paper rolls. Now for the wood round, I'm so excited to show you this technique that I recently saw someone do. I cut down a long strip of the contact paper to cover that whole outside edge of the circle. And you want it wide enough so that you can wrap it around the edge and then the inside portion of that circle as well. Then I worked my way around the outside of the circle, peeling the paper backing off as I went. You don't want to pull that backing off entirely before you start, or your contact paper will likely start to stick to something that it shouldn't and cause a lot of frustration. Once I got the contact paper along the outside, I'm going to use my heat gun to shape and mold that paper to curve around the edges and onto that inside portion of the circle. This was so fascinating and magical to me. I never knew that you could heat up contact paper like this. Essentially, the heat makes the paper stretch and mold to the shape that it's covering. But you do want to be careful here not to apply too much heat. If it gets too hot, it's going to tear. I would recommend using a craft heat gun over this industrial one, but this is all that I have. So I just go very quickly over the paper, shape it, and then move on to the next section. I did that same process on the inside of the circle as well, and this made it so that I had no wrinkles in the paper whatsoever. It definitely adds to that real marble look of my inspiration piece. Next, I used my box cutter to trim down the excess contact paper and clean up that inside edge. Then I traced the circle to cut out a piece of contact paper to cover the bottom and the inside. And I used my heat gun on that inside portion to help the paper bend and mold easier. I took the box cutter to the edge again to clean it up, and now we just need to put the pieces together. I'm using hot glue to add the legs on. You can certainly use a stronger adhesive if you choose to and want this project to hold up better over time. I'm using hot glue as a quick alternative, but I made sure that the seam of the contact paper on those toilet paper rolls were all facing on the inside. Now, the inspiration came with 2 risers, so I did create a second one as well, and to make it a little bit shorter, I cut the toilet paper rolls in half. Then I just followed the exact same process we did for the white marble riser. I also added the bottom of the circle on first before wrapping the sides. This gave a slightly cleaner look, but really not too noticeable of a difference. And that's it for this set. I think they look great, and if you had to buy all of these supplies, it would cost you about $10 or so, depending on where you get that contact paper from. Next up, I came across this Clyde bowl centerpiece, and I just love that rope detail, but at $355, again, I'll make it myself. Now, mine will not be cement like theirs, but we are going to get a similar vibe. So to create the bowl base, I'm using this empty Anthropology candle. No, I did not clean out the rest of that wax from the inside. You certainly could, you probably should, but I just didn't. And this bowl that I found at the Goodwill. Of course, I'm going to clean the bowl really well after bringing it home from the thrift store. And I also cleaned off the candle to remove any of those oils that were from my hands when handling it. Then I used E6000 glue on the rim of the candle, and I'm going to attach this to the bottom of the bowl to get a similar shape to my inspiration piece. I let this set overnight and moved on to creating those rope handle pieces. I'm going to use a pole noodle to do this because I want that thick, chunky handle look like the Lulu and Georgia version. However, you could also get a wood ring and cut that in half to get a similar look. The ring just wouldn't be as substantial looking. But I cut my pole noodle down to the length that I wanted, and then I cut it into strips. I also cut that middle section on the inside of the pole noodle down so it would be a little bit flatter. And I created 6 strips just like this. Now these pole noodles are bright pink, and even with that rope wrapped around them, I knew that you would be able to see through it, so I painted them all white. And next I'm using this hemp rope, which I actually found as an unopened roll at the Goodwill bins a long time ago, and this is the perfect material to use and looks just like that inspiration. You could use jute twine, but you can see here how different that looks, and definitely more farmhouse, which isn't my style. But I'm going to start wrapping the rope around my pole noodle pieces and adding some hot glue in here and there to tack it down. I was a little bit worried about the white underneath after I did this first one, and I thought it might be a little bit too visible once I bend the noodles. You definitely can see that white. So for the rest of them, I painted them tan first, and then I wrapped them with the rope. Before I can add the rope noodles to the bowl, I needed to paint it. I went with Heirloom White, which is a creamy off-white color, and when spray painting, I like to start with the object upside down. This makes sure that you get good coverage all the way around, and then when you flip it over to paint the other side, you don't risk ruining that top good side. I did about 3 coats each way with it upside down and then right side up. It is better to add several thin coats of spray paint rather than thicker coats, which can cause it to start to drip. This is something I've had to learn the hard way over the years, but you get a much smoother look this way. Alright, now I can assemble the bowl. I have all my rope noodle pieces and the bowl is dry, so to attach the noodles, I'm using a combination of E6000 and hot glue. I added the E6000 to the pole noodle itself and the hot glue to that outside edge where the rope is because hot glue will melt your pole noodle. I thought it would work best if I added all of the noodles on before curving each one and attaching the bottom. This also gave that E6000 a little bit of time to set up. I also added the 2 opposing sides on first, and then I measured that distance in between them so I knew where to put the rest and they were evenly spaced. Then once I had the rope handles on, I took some additional rope to cover up that very top where it connects to the bowl. You could see a slight gap there, which I didn't love. Now I can curve those rope noodles and glue the bottoms down to the bowl, but you could still see through the gaps in the rope now that it's bent. So again, I added on some more rope around it to fill in any of those areas where you could either see the paint or the pole noodle underneath. I did this all the way around the bowl, and that's it for this project. I think it's a pretty good dupe compared to the original. I love textures and unique designs, so when I saw the scallop vase, I knew I could recreate it for much less than $124. I scoured my thrift stores for a vase in a similar shape, but unfortunately I couldn't find anything, so I picked up this vase from the Dollar Tree, so mine ends up being about half the size of the Lulu and Georgia Inspiration. I've had these wood rings in my stash as part of a larger pack, but you can also pick these up from the Dollar Tree. I'll link mine from Amazon in the description box. But I glued the larger and the smaller ones together using super glue. And this spray accelerator instantly dries that super glue so that you can keep on working. Then to attach them to the glass vase, I'm using E6000. Now this takes much longer to dry, so I'm going to use masking tape to hold them in place overnight while the glue dries. Once the glue is dried, I need to add in that scallop detail. And at first I thought this would work really well using air dry clay. And while I do think you could get this to work, I think my clay was a little bit too dry and it just kept cracking and crumbling. So I didn't feel like I was achieving the right look this way. So then I got out my joint compound and a rounded palette knife to apply it on that way. If you saw my Dollar Tree fall video, I did something similar on a pumpkin to create a weave texture. And this method worked out pretty well. It's not super clean, but joint compound is sandable, so I wasn't too worried about it. I did try to make each swipe as clean as I could though, to make less work for myself later on. And for the second row, or for that top layer of the scallops, I used a narrower palette knife so you could see that variation in the lines. I let the joint compound dry overnight, and then I grabbed my Dremel with a sanding drum to smooth out any rough areas. But I will say on the second side, I just used the corner of a sanding sponge, and I actually thought that that worked better. So don't think that you need a Dremel tool to create this project. And now all that's left to do is to paint the thing. I had the perfect color to match with this terracotta paint in the color Pueblo, and I'm going to use a pointed brush to make sure that I can get into all those nooks and crannies. The way I like to use this paint to get that pottery look is to apply the first coat as you normally would paint something with sweeping brush strokes. And then with the second coat, I stipple the paint on. This is what adds all of that wonderful texture. I ended up adding 3 coats of paint, and on that last one, I felt like the color was drying a little bit darker than I had wanted, so I added in some white paint. Again, I stippled on this last coat of paint for even more texture. And that's it for this one. While I wish it was a little bit larger, I think it turned out super cute.